Hello.
Hello, how are you? It's so
I know
nice to
your
see
living
lovely
room
face.
from your concerts.
Oh yeah,
Wow.
this isn't the bit that you normally see.
Oh, is it not? Mine looks a bit boring, but you have to look that way to see interesting stuff.
Oh, how lovely.
Yeah. How are you,
Oh,
darling?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Okay, yeah. Getting there gradually, fighting the world. So tell me about your podcast and everything.
Well, I mean, it's not as much as a podcast, but yeah, I've just been chatting to some mates about music and
Right.
about life because, yeah, like I said, it's one of those things when I do concerts, the audience always want to talk about is what we actually do, and it makes me think, maybe they're actually
Yes,
interested
true.
in it because it is a random job.
Yeah.
You've got to admit that.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's funny how I did that radio program the other day, Inside Music. Have you done that?
No, I've not.
It's really, you should do it. It's wonderful. I mean, the person who does it is brilliant. The woman who's the producer, Sarah Devonald, and she's really great because it was incredibly challenging recording it because I did it at home. So the first thing is they send you a microphone and that's 72 hours you can't touch it.
Of course.
And then you have to set up I have a tiny music room, set it up as a recording studio, so you have to have black blankets everywhere and things.
Yeah.
But the challenging thing was really listening to music, because at that point I really hadn't listened to I played the piano quite a lot and I had not practiced very much at all. I taught, of course, from the beginning of April onwards, but so it was really tough. But it was in the end, it was quite cathartic to do it. And when I listened to it, because it came out about a month later, a bit more, I realized how far I'd come in that time from the absolute shock of this thing. This is utter shock. And now I felt totally, totally isolated to start with. I mean, I wasn't, because I got friends and I got Piotr and everything is wonderful. But I mean, at the same time, just so far away from the world, and it being so weirdly warm as well at that time. It just felt like, well, are we on holiday? Have I retired? Where am I? I just couldn't quite process it all. But I'm doing a bit better now, and I think there's a lot to work on in terms of what we come back to. Don't you think?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, I think at the beginning, because I know you even more than me, our lives tend to be chasing our tails, because we never stop. We're going from place to place. We never get to sit down and think and be. And suddenly to be forced into that situation where you can't do anything else, I was fortunate in a way, because financially I had to find some way of making money. And the only thing I could think of was by doing what I do and doing concerts. And yes, there were plenty of days where I really didn't want to move. I didn't want to get my violin out. I didn't want to play music, but I had to find some way of paying the bills. And I think if I hadn't had that, I mean, as it was, I was kind of free falling. I was sleeping all the time. If I sat down, I just slept.
I know. I mean, it's hard, isn't it, to know how much of it is shock, and how much of it is just exhaustion from from the years of work.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you're not a holiday person, are you?
Well,
I happen to know this about you. Are we recording yet, by the way?
Yeah, we are.
Okay.
I can cut any of this out.
No, it's totally fine. I just wanted to check before I did a Davina and said something rude. This is Davina, don't swear.
Come on, you can say anything you want. It's just for YouTube.
No, but I remember you saying, I remember taking you to task about not being a holiday person.
I know, and it's usually, especially the last few years, it tends to be lack of organisation rather than not wanting to take a break, because there's so many times when I'm just like, I desperately want to stop, but there's always something that comes in and you just think, I can't really say no to that.
Well, it is incredible how I mean, that whole thing. I realize I've not properly stopped. The only time I actually stopped was last summer, funnily enough, when I had a major hernia operation.
That's not going to help oboe playing.
Well, no, and actually I was really pleased I had it done, but I had to have, he said 6 weeks off. And after 3.5, I was on the Wigmore Hall stage.
No.
But I had some very angry family members talking to me about it. No,
I'm not
what actually
surprised.
happened was that, I mean, I hope he didn't see this and feel bad, but that hernia had a name, and it was Azapeca. Because it was playing a piece of his that gave it to me.
Oh no. I mean, you think about lots of things that you can kind of get a hernia from. I would never even have begun to think that playing the oboe would be one of them.
Well, playing the oboe in a normal way is not. But actually, a lot of symphony orchestra oboists do get hernias, partly because they're sitting to play a lot, and that's often it's really hard to remember to sit well all the time when sitting in an orchestra is your full-time job. So that's one thing, but it's also the sort of level of sound in many orchestras you're expected to produce in a symphony orchestra particularly. Although I, funnily enough, found chamber orchestras, because the strings tend to be more soloist-led, chamber players, soloistic players, and the oboe is always playing in chamber repertoire, very often playing the same line as the first violin, certainly in repertoire from the classical period. And so it's quite competitive in a chamber orchestra, but in a sort of fun way. It's not a bad thing, I don't think. But you do have to play quite strong to make it's partly because I always want to influence the phrasing a bit. I'm a bit of a control freak. Sorry.
No, I do the same from the front in my trace.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's why it's such fun playing with you, because I can look over at you and we both have the same kind of feel of the line. I just edited that concert that we did just for some promotional stuff at Christmas time, and it was wonderful to see. You're just smiling all the time. It's so lovely.
I was having fun.
I know, it was fun. But but the symphony orchestras, I mean, there are times when you just have to play really, really loud, and it's so huge, and the halls are so big. So I think that extreme playing. But my extreme playing is not from that. It's because I've wanted to make the high register of the oboe something really expressive, and so if you look at the Richard Strauss orchestral technique book, he sort of says top F sharp is the absolute maximum. But in fact, I've gone very, very, very high, but I mean expressively up to B flat. So composers have written a lot for me, like John Tavener or John Woolrich, have and actually Thea Musgrave as well, have taken me more and more expressively into the top. I mean, it was I think it was probably John Woolrich who did it first. Yes, it was. And he just, that oboe concerto he wrote me, which is an absolutely superb piece, which is you can hear it on the social medias. It's an amazing piece, but it's got some extraordinary writing in it, sort of very, very, very high. But the thing is that they're not the only composers. It's not only for me that people have written high. So this piece of Azapeca's, which is called Mimo 2, I think it's a version with piano, a version with a huge orchestra. Brilliant piece, really exciting. And I did it with the BBC Symphony at the Barbican. But the trouble is that so often, the first time I have to do something, and you'll recognise this, it is live on the radio at a great hall with their principal conductor with a great orchestra. And so I had not played that piece before, and even though the pieces existed before, it wasn't written for me. The first time I ever played it was in a big concert. So all that means is the preparation has to be around 200% more than having more rehearsal, maybe a little playthrough first somewhere, maybe doing it with a small orchestra somewhere, or maybe an amateur orchestra used to be able to do that occasionally sometimes, play something through and have a go at it. But that's not how the world works now for me. So, but the thing is, this I call it the dismount. The end of this piece has got half a page of absolutely monstrous writing, and sort of, it's like it's like on the parallel bars they're doing the turning, and then they go up, and then they and actually the up is the top B flat, which has to be in tune with the piccolo and several other instruments, and it's 5 Fs. So I was, practicing it, and then I just felt something pop, and I thought, oh dear, that doesn't feel good. And I, of course, didn't do anything about it, but eventually I had to, and I was very glad I did. So I did have a summer off. I mean, I suppose I had nearly 4 weeks off stage, and we went to Dubai on holiday. We went to Spain. We had a great time. But I was very uncomfortable for a lot of it. So it wasn't. I mean, I wanted to have some time with my husband, but it wasn't really like having a holiday. And I was worried all the time that I'd agreed to do these Wigmores with Au Moderne, and then my own festival, where I was playing Mark Simpson's oboe quartet again, which is an absolutely incredible piece, but again, extremely high ranging and sort of broad brush strokes of hyper expressivity. But I managed to do it, but it was very scary starting to play. But so I haven't had anything like this time off in 40 years. I mean, it's a revelation. It's I mean, of course, there's all the shock. There's the enormous worry about the future for my children and for my students and for all my colleagues, the people I love who play, and then George Floyd and Black Lives Matter coming along at just the time when I did that I was so privileged to do that amazing Wigmore. And so there's been a lot to kind of take one out of the reverie in a way, but having those 2, maybe 3 months of just real calm, and actually not even having to entertain or feed family or do none of that, just look after ourselves. I mean, it was really something. And I'm doing a lot of meditating, and I started meditating when I was very young, so I can do it very easily, but I do find it's been incredibly important and useful in this time, just because it's like you just have to come back down again. So much seems to make you go a bit up, a bit tense, and then it brings you back down. Fascinating, really.
Absolutely. Huh.
How do you relax?
Relax. Do you know what I'm very, very bad at, and actually I've been extremely bad the last few weeks of just like getting up. Well, I quite often go for a run when I get up, but after that,
oh yes, you're a runner, aren't you? Yeah.
Well,
no, it's amazing. It's a great thing.
No, it's been something that over the last few years is just been something. Do you know, there's so little that I do that is just for me, and that I mean, it's really just for me, and that I don't think about anybody else. I'm not comparing myself to anybody else. I'd quite like to run faster, but that's not because other people can run faster, really. It's because I just like to be the best that I can be at anything that I do. So, but no, it's been actually also the health side of it has been, especially during the last few months, because we're in this tiny 1-bed flat. So once you're in the flat, you don't move.
Right.
There's nowhere to go. So actually forcing myself to go out for a run and walk either side of it, so I can get my
steps in.
I'll try and get 10,000 steps in on one run, because I had to get into that mindset at the beginning of lockdown when you were only allowed out once a day.
Yes, so, absolutely.
So other than that, and I don't find that particularly relaxing. I mean, the walking is relaxing, especially hearing the bird song, but the running isn't.
Yes. Do you remember that movie, What Women Want?
I've not seen it.
Mel Gibson movie. Because it's very interesting. It's a very funny. It's a movie where he gets a bump on the head, and he hears what they. Yeah.
I saw a bit of it once.
They did a female version of it recently with What Men Want, which is quite funny. But there's a one, what you just said about running. It was almost exactly what he discovered that women want from running, from reading their minds, which is a time when you're not being compared, you're not being looked at in any particular way. And it's funny, the differences. I mean, they seem to be less, the differences between men and women in some ways, and yet sometimes you find out, like from a comment like that the differences are still really quite profound. Particularly if you're on stage, I think, or on show in any way, as a in a job where you're part of a top team, or it's fascinating. Yeah, the what men want film was very raunchy.
I can imagine.
So I expect you to wear eye blinds when you see that one. You can slip over not to see anything naughty.
But actually, what you're saying then, this is something that has been. I've seen it happen before with composers getting in touch with me, and it's almost exclusively men who will send me emails when it's composers that I haven't met, who
Really?
just will send
That's
works through.
Absolutely true. I've just thought of that.
When earlier in the beginning of lockdown, exactly the same thing happened. A whole bunch of men sent me works to say, and not a single girl amongst them. And I think there is something, I don't know whether it's something that, I can't see why it would be something actually integral to being a woman, but I think it's the way we grow up.
In some way. Maybe it's just, I mean, although maybe, is it the same out of this situation? Is it the same? You have very few submissions from women. I'm looking in my memory banks now and trying to think of the number of times when a woman has sent me music with a view to playing it, and it's very, very, very few. It's always me contacting them. But I get obviously get quite a lot of music from gentlemen callers.
Yeah. Yeah, very nice.
Yeah.
I did end up tweeting about this a couple of weeks into lockdown, because I didn't want to, and because I wanted to play these works, but I didn't want to look like I'd already been trolled for wearing a women composer t-shirt when I'd been playing some Bach on a video. And I
trolled.
And I didn't want to end up being another bit of the problem. So I felt like it was important to tweet, and because that's the way I reach out to composers most easily, and say, if there are any female composers out there who fancy sending me anything, I
remember that
performing. And then loads of people did get in touch, and I've had a really nice mix and really balanced mix of
fantastic. Oh, that's really good to hear.
But I had to go out there and do that, because I mean, it's possible that as the concerts were happening and as it was obvious that I was playing lots of new music and doing lots of premieres, that people would have then got in touch, but it would have meant that the first few weeks would have been exclusively male, and I didn't want that to happen.
No, well, it's very good you reached out. I mean, I think that we do reached out, such an American term, but it's you literally did reach through the Twitters and ask for that. That's a really wonderful thing. I mean, I hope that women composers, or rather I should say non-male composers, know that they can send me anything and I will always have a good look at it with a view to performing it if I can. And so if any of your non-male composers are watching this, please do send me things. I'm really interested, particularly if you happen to be from a Black and minority ethnic background. And I wanted to talk to you about Elena Alberger. Do you know about her?
No.
Well, she's married to an extremely fine violinist, Thomas Bowes.
Okay.
She's 70 years old.
Okay.
And I think she has a Jamaican heritage, and she lives in Herefordshire. She's an absolutely superb pianist, and I think she's one of our very best composers. And she's written a lot of music for her husband, because he's got her trapped at home writing violin music. But she is really, really great. And I cannot think why she's not. She did a superb series on BBC Radio 3 just recently about black composers. 3-part series. 2 parts of it are still available.
Okay.
And it was really, and she was brilliant on the radio too. I thought she was like a natural, very quietly spoken, but when she went for a point, she just went up a little bit, and the effect was big. Oh, that was such a fascinating program, and the history is just, it's mind blowing when you know the actual facts. It makes me rather angry that our education, it's true of school too.
Yeah.
I mean, of normal school, of the history that we were taught, when I was at school, we were taught Industrial Revolution history, but we weren't taught anything about the slave trade, nothing. Absolutely nothing. I don't even know why we were taught about the Industrial Revolution. What the hell's the point? I mean, it's interesting, but it's, you know, and of course my kids did Second World War German history for their GCSEs, and I learned a lot from that too, because I mean that was really, particularly putting it to the German slant was really, really, really good. I thought that was a great thing to do. That was quite controversial at the time, I remember. It's probably 10 years ago. But yeah, so there's a lot to think about, isn't there, in rebalancing things? Yeah. I'm very happy to have people ask me for opinions about repertoire for competitions and repertoire for concerts and things. And I'm also very happy for people to give me information, because I'm on a massive learning curve right now, about pieces that they think I might not know, which I may well not know, are from diverse composers with diverse backgrounds. Tell you what we did recently, and this was Chichi Nwanoku's instigation, Coleridge Tailor Nonette. Have you played it?
I haven't even heard it, which is a terrible thing to do.
Oh my very goodness. Have you played the Spohr Nonette?
No, that I've heard, but I've not played.
Well, that's got a great violin part, but it's over and over and over again. It's just like, oh God, it lasts a whole hour nearly. But you can make it really good. I did with a great French violinist once in the festival in Finland. It really came to life. But the Coleridge Tailor it's just totally exquisite music. 19 years old. And he was a violinist at the Royal College of Music. And Stanford was the head of the college. And he said, he brought in a rule that everybody who went to the college had to have composition lessons. And as a result of that, Coleridge Tailor, who's destined to be a violinist, thank goodness, he became a composer. Because then you've got Hiawatha, you've got a whole list of beautiful pieces. But I mean, that Nonette apparently was one of the first things he wrote. It's got a piano in it. It's got no flute.
Careful now.
Sorry, flute players. Sorry, some flute players. Some of you are unforgivable. The flute's the greatest instrument if it's in the right hands. But that piece has no flute in it. So it's oboe, clarinet, bassoon, horn, piano, violin. I think is it 2 violins? No, violin, viola, cello, double bass. That's it. It's just divine. And of course, Chichi said that she basically had to have a hand in preparing the music for it, set of parts, because it wasn't even published. I mean, it's probably maybe a 40-minute piece, 35, 40, at least 30 minutes. And so it's a big, substantial thing. It's like a cross between Mendelssohn, early Ravel, and tiny bit of Wagner, maybe. I hate to say it. But it really is the most delightful piece. I mean, I just cannot wait to play it again. We were all wildly tweeting afterwards. Amy Harmon and me were like, this piece everybody should play. It really is. It's a superb piece. It's a fascinating story. I mean, I hope that one day, he died sadly very young, but I hope that one day there may be more music by him comes to light or is regularly in the repertoire, because I think he's really that piece is just such a delight. We should play it together.
We should. That'd be fabulous. It'd be a post lockdown treat.
It'll have to involve champagne, that's for sure.
Definitely.
Or maybe, what was it? No, Aperol Spritz. Isn't that what those barmen in Germany had me making, because those boys didn't know how to do it.
No, and
Or was
you
it a
ended up,
Negroni?
I can't remember what you wanted, but they couldn't do it, and you ended up with like an entire tumbler full of, what did he? I can't even remember what you had, but
I'm sure it was
Baileys, and they kept filling it up to the top again and again.
I don't quite remember getting home after that. It was raining, wasn't it? Was it snowing?
It definitely wasn't snowing. I'm just trying to remember whether I walked you to. I think I might have walked you to the hotel.
You walked me to the hotel. That was very gentlemanly of you. That was very gentlewomanly of you.
You know, chivalry isn't dead.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that was really fun. Yeah. So, it's been amazing what you've been doing with your commissions and with your playing of these composers. I mean, it was one of the things that I was really proud of with the Wigmore, was that I was able to recycle some music. And
I mean, what was lovely about your program was that it wasn't like a lot of programs at the moment seem to be. It wasn't like Schubert. It was such a wonderful mix of music and you know, stuff that meant so much and that hung well together, but also made, you know, it had sense to it.
Look, nobody understands. I sound like an Australian. They'll say "look," don't they, at the beginning of a sentence? Look, Nick. Look, Fenella. Nobody understands better than me what that felt like to do that concert, because that was a mountain to climb.
I'm sure.
Going from hiding in your house trying not to die to actually going into London in that way, and going to London to rehearse as well. Not being able to hug Julius.
Yeah.
I mean, in fact, he's actually had it. He's even tested that he's had it. He's got antibodies. But we don't know enough about this thing.
No.
I spoke to 25, I think she is, old oboist who had it fairly early on, and she's still having to do special lung exercises to rebuild her lung power. I just, it's very risky, I think, for us, for wind players and singers.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so I understand why great artists who have spent years honing wonderful Schubert and Schumann may want to stay safe like that and do what they feel comfortable with.
Yeah,
I mean, I thought Imogen Cooper's program was extraordinary. I mean, they've all been wonderful, but I do understand. But at the same time, I was determined to take the opportunity to say something to a lot of different people, because I knew there'd be a lot of people listening, but also my family. I wanted to send love to my family, who I haven't, the ones I haven't been able to see for so long, and to friends and colleagues, and I wanted to reassure, and I wanted to grieve with people who were losing family members and loved ones, and when I designed the program, I myself was losing a family member to this thing. In fact, she somehow has pulled through it, which is just mind-blowing. But then, of course, having designed the program, then I had to find a way to play it. In other words, I had to find a way to be able to play it without crying. Yeah. I mean, basically, if I see a mouse with a poorly foot, I'll cry. So, and I don't really like rodents, but I've been in this situation before when my father was diagnosed with terminal cancer. I was in the middle of a program of Shostakovich 14. I was rehearsing it, and I just had to go back to the text and go back to the piano and score read it all again, just get used to the emotion. So what I did, I mean, all my neighbours here must have known the program I was playing, because I played it through so many times, thinking about all the different nuances that could be possible and where it could go, what it might feel like, visualizing playing it there, which of course is a dream, but also visualizing playing it as if you were making a recording with no possibility for retake.
Yeah.
So yeah, but what I didn't rehearse, because I just didn't, was the was talking about George Floyd. And so it was almost impossible to talk about that without getting upset. Luckily, Julius heroically rescued me, but it just seemed so ironic for me to be playing a piece which is all circular breathing by Bach, and having the privilege of air when that's not something he was afforded. So that was kind of amazing thing. Do you know, I was going to have to put my headphones into charge for a second. I was going to plug in I'm going to use some different headphones. Hang on, because these just gone. When I last weekend, I drove to Germany, and
congratulations.
Which is kind of a crazy thing to do. I know, I was very scared. I had to go because I've gone through the whole process of becoming German. You know about this.
Yeah, that's why I was congratulating.
But your followers maybe don't. I see. So, deutsche Staatsbürgerschaft. Ich bin ein deutscher Staatsbürger.
Gratuliere.
So they were, thank you. Which was a big process. I mean, it's because funnily enough, my husband's been going through the process of becoming British at the same time. So the German B1 language exam, let's just take this as an example, is a 5-hour deal with 4 different parts. And it is done at various specific sites in Germany. And you actually have to pass all of the different modules in order to get your certificate. If you pass 3 and you don't pass 1, you don't have to do the 3 again, at least. But it's a proper, I learned a lot of German and I understood it really quite well. Then there's a citizenship test, which is nothing like as hard as the British citizenship test, which is ridiculous. But I was very shocked by Piotr's B1 English language test, which was 2 5-minute chunks of chatting with somebody in a room. That was all. And I was a bit surprised by that. So anyway, the Germans very kindly agreed that I could be British. No, I could be German and British, but only if I got it sorted out by the end of January, which I just did.
Right.
And then they needed me to go and pick up the certificate, because they said otherwise, until you sign and we stamp it and everything, if you don't do it, we have to start all over again. And I was like, oh, no, please. So my auntie was ill at that time. I was really freaking out. Anyway, I just thought, as soon as moment I can, I'm going to just drive down. So eventually I booked a Eurostar. I got in the car, went on my own, which means all the ticket machines through France, you have to pay for tickets. You have to get out of the car, go and get the ticket, and then go back into the car. You have to go with the ticket in the card machine. But so I picked up my German certificate, and what was really wonderful was having a distanced barbecue with my students in Germany, because I've been teaching them online. We're not allowed to teach in the same room at the moment. They've got to do lots of preparation before we can come back to teaching in the same room again. And they've been absolutely brilliant. They're from all over the world. I do have one German student, actually, two German students, but they're from all over the world. There's like 11 of them, and they've just been incredibly brave dealing with this. But sometimes it's interesting to spot that they've been too hard on themselves and get a little bit even more frustrated. I mean, studying music is frustrating because you're constantly facing yourself with something you can't do, you know? Yeah. It's a bit like learning new music. It's
a bit like just playing generally.
Generally playing, yeah, probably. But when you're studying, it's even more so, isn't it? Don't you think? So, and it's like having a mirror held up to your every pore of your skin, your face, and
because you're not just trying to please to do what you feel is the best thing, but you're also trying to please the person that you have such respect for, and so you've got that multiple thing the whole time, that you're not just disappointing yourself, you're disappointing somebody you really respect whenever it's not quite good enough.
Well, I would hate to think that they thought they were disappointing me by not doing well enough, but I think it is a reality, unfortunately. Yeah. So but they've just been doing brilliantly. But it's interesting to see that if something goes wrong, they basically feel that it's their fault. But none of us have lived through I have a 90-year-old ex-mother-in-law. I mean, she's still my mother-in-law. I love her. And she's never lived through a global pandemic. I mean, nobody's been through this before. So it's very, I suppose Vera Lynn had when she was born, because that was Spanish flu.
Yeah.
She was 103.
Probably didn't remember it. And also it was different then. I mean, it just was.
Yeah. So I've just been trying to help them not take everything too hard. And we actually had a wonderful performance coaching session last night with Jessica Mogridge. Do you know Jess?
No.
She's an oboist actually, but she's a very fine oboist, Hong Kong Philharmonic originally, and she's really lovely. But she's trained as a performance coach, which basically what that means is you just do that. She helps you do what you do, but better, and get more satisfaction from what you do for yourself. And it was the most wonderful session, and it was incredible. And I took part in it too. I've got all the notes there. It was really wonderful. I mean, I do recommend her to anybody who's finding difficulty with motivation and maybe just how it feels. And she's really, it's not therapy. It's really constructive help. And I, James Turnbull, who's an ex-pupil of mine, who you know, James Turnbull has spoke very highly of her. And she was kind of mentored in it at the beginning by Karen O'Connor, who sadly died a couple of years ago, who I think was a brilliant person. And she was also the second oboe in the CBSO. And she was also utterly brilliant at it. And when I did Dartington for that 1 year, I got her down and she gave a brilliant lecture. It was just superb. But it was really extraordinary hearing how my class understand each other, and how, in a way, because of the energy which I have very clearly in my mind how they should behave towards each other. I don't discipline. There's no discipline or even telling people what to do. It's just I have a really clear idea of how it should work, how it best works. And they were so respectful and supportive of each other. And I thought they had wonderful insights into each other's work as well. It was really quite profound. It was, for me, very moving. It was also very moving when one of my students, who's from Beijing, said he'd suddenly realized how worried he was about his family, because they've just had to lock down Beijing again. And there's a lot of worry there about what's going on. Of course, they've got very good track and trace there, so hopefully it won't last long. But this person who I was speaking to today, who's working with a top Cambridge professor, says we're definitely going to have a second wave in the autumn. It's almost certain, apparently. Yeah. Because of the UV light, there's more ultraviolet light at the moment, and it kills the virus when it's outdoors. But as soon as that starts to go down, the light goes down, it's going to be more difficult to contain it. So I think we have to kind of prepare a little bit.
Yeah.
But so much to think about, isn't there?
I know. It's not even, do you put your head in the sand and just hope it will all disappear eventually, or do you do actual things to fight against it in a way, mentally?
Well, I think there's that, but there's also there's the chance to reappraise what we do and why we do it and who's it for. And it's very interesting, I find, all the stars kind of lining up to show bright light on some aspects of the profession that I think could do with a refresh, to say the very least. And I think for me, the deepest, most important and profound thing is about introducing children to music quite young. Yeah. And I know I've been on about this before with Every Child a Musician, but then Brexit got completely in the way of that, and it was not possible to pursue it because the politicians were not in the right mindset, and they're in a difficult mindset now. But I cannot imagine what their lives are like. Can you think? I mean, it must be absolute hell, I would have thought. But at the same time, it gives us a chance to look at how we allocate what money there is, what money the arts make, what money it brings to the country, what good it does to the country, what the beneficial aspects of it, and whether we can actually enlarge on those, bring the beneficial aspects to a wider audience. And for me, I think it's an absolute no-brainer to do what they did in Newham and give every single primary school child 4 years of musical instrument tuition. They give them the instrument, they give them the music, they give them the graded exams, they give them a certificate, they give them badges, they give them the resources. It's actually quite reasonable. It only cost Newham £2 million a year to give every single primary school child 4 years of music education, of individual instrumental lessons. It's not about classical or any other genre. It's about reading music. It's about learning to play music. It's not about creating more musicians for the future. It's about showing children that it's for absolutely everybody, that real music and also writing music is a thing that we do spontaneously, humming along as you walk along, creating an idea in your head of a piece. The number of people that say that they've got a piece in their head to me is sort of incredible. The music is like water. We're drawn to music, humans, and we're nothing without water. We're nothing without music. We're so much less without music. And I'm incredibly grateful and proud, really, of people being called to talk to the minister responsible for culture in the government, and for brilliant letters like Chichi's letter to the Prime Minister today. And I know that Chichi Nanoku knows Boris Johnson personally because she knew him when he was Mayor of London. And so it's actually a letter that's going from someone he knows. But the letter is very wide-ranging, and it does, of course, mention education in a very, very strong and good way, and I approve of it. And then there was Music Matters on the radio this morning with great people talking. But if it was me, I would be saying that we need to look at the very foundation of why this is going wrong. And it's going wrong because people don't believe it's for them. When Chineke go to primary schools in the East End of London, suppose, for instance, or anywhere really, and they're working with non-white children, they're playing for non-white children, and they're playing the same music that we would all play, and the children go, but this is great, and I had no idea that this was for me. But because they'd never seen anybody their skin tone playing that music before. She said on the radio this morning that her family used to come to concerts when she was young. They kept getting told to be quiet, or not to clap in the middle of things. I mean, if somebody wants to clap in the middle of in between movements, or I don't know, in the old days, if somebody did a crescendo, they used to clap. Roger Norrington I've seen him turn round and encourage applause in the middle of a piece. After a sort of lovely flute lick or something.
We do it in other music. We do it in other art forms.
Absolutely,
so why not? I mean, the thing is what you're saying. It's why classical music more and more gets the elitist label, which it utterly isn't. But the trouble is that because we've lost for so many years, we've lost that grassroots thing where all kids learn about music. I mean, the school workshops that I've done in state primary schools in London, particularly, where I have asked to go into schools that were keen but had no music, or had very little access to music, or the kids didn't have much access. So I haven't gone into the schools where they're already doing lots.
Yeah.
I just find that really sad, because you haven't got music teachers and you're expecting other class teachers to take over the role of doing music. If they don't have the confidence to do that, how are they supposed to teach music?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Well, the training is an issue in that respect. Actually, the training of teachers is an issue.
The training, but also the fact that they're having to fit in so much stuff that has to tick all of the boxes, and because music isn't in there, if they've got that extra half an hour that was supposed to be devoted to music, of course they're going to finish their reading, or they're going to finish their maths that didn't quite get finished whatever day it was. And avoid the thing that they feel very uncomfortable doing. That's not surprising, which means that, of course, it's a vicious
cycle,
in circles, which means that, you know, you've got all of these children who just simply don't have any interaction with music, or very little interaction with music, and certainly not with live musicians. And it means that, you know, more and more it's going to be the kids who already have something, whose families are going to be able to afford to send them to do their extracurricular music, which means that they're then going to be learning the instruments. And whether that means that they end up playing in amateur orchestras or listening to concerts or actually joining the profession, it means that more and more and more you're going to get this very, very, very small band of the people.
That's unhealthy for us. It's interbreeding.
Oh, absolutely.
I call that musical interbreeding. And I think it's as unhealthy as, you know, any of the aristocracy.
Yeah, absolutely.
You end up with one big eyebrow.
Yeah. I didn't come from that world. I had parents who loved music, but I fought my way through everything on scholarships.
Totally.
You know, I've never owned a decent violin. Everything I've done, I mean, I still don't. Everything I've done has been with grateful thanks to somebody else making it possible, because we didn't.
I mean, that's also, I mean, that's lovely. It's great, and it's correct that you should have had that opportunity. But it's also, it's the kind of barriers that stop some people from progressing.
Well, if I hadn't had that support from my parents and that love of music from them, then I wouldn't have been in that situation where people would have noticed that I had something that should be nurtured, and that, you know, I would be. And I was very fortunate that the head of my primary school, you know, realized that I should be somewhere that actually had some music, and told my parents. So I got sent to music school. Yeah.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah. Well, because
you're lucky your parents didn't earn just a little bit more money, because the reality is there's a huge middle gap. There's the parents who can afford it and the parents who can't afford it, music school. And then there's in the middle, there's people who have a reasonable income for whom the fees are completely unaffordable. And they do say that they never turn away anybody, but that doesn't mean that their parents can afford it.
But then nowadays, I don't know if they still have it, but certainly when I was at Purcell, the music and ballet scheme meant that every British child got a government scholarship.
They do, but it's means tested.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's means tested. I had a very talented student whose parents were, one was an academic and one was, he ran a gallery. And they have 4 or 5 children, season tickets. They live in Kent, traveling into work every day, expenses, mortgage. They simply couldn't afford to send her to the Purcell school. Of course, she was offered an assisted places scheme. It's still not fair.
No.
That's why I say you're lucky that you got the scholarship thing, because I think a lot of people still don't get that. I mean, it's not an issue of it's just an issue of access. But it worries me how these barriers that are there to sort of get the right people in, they dissuade people of colour for actually going for it. And it's you have to have people with the strength of character of Sheku and Aseta's parents to actually get their children what they need. I mean, those are incredible, bright, forthright, totally dedicated parents. And, you know, all you need is one. I mean, if it had been just me and my dad, I would not be a musician. There's no way he wanted me to do all this. It was my mother was the driving force of the whole thing. My father, he sold cars to start with, not very successfully, I think. And then he was a prison officer. And so that, I mean, my mum did old ladies' feet. And so it was, but she was always trying to keep up with her older sister, who had a child, my cousin Charles, who's now a wonderful, wonderful singer, went to King's Cambridge. I didn't get into King's Cambridge because I failed the academic test, because probably a tiny bit dyslexic, I don't know. But Salisbury, where I got in, you didn't have an academic test. You just had to read from the Bible, which I did with great flair.
I can imagine.
Yeah, so, and that was all on scholarships. And then when my parents couldn't afford the part they had to pay, well, my mum used to be a dental nurse when she was a kid, and one of my godfathers was a dentist. So they asked my godfather for money, and he gave them money for my school fees. I mean, he was an amazing man. But it's like, that was kind of it was lucky. And then when I got to sixth form, when I was at Purcell, there was no money, and I was actually leaving. I was going to go to a school we're living in Hampshire by then, and that would have been okay. But it was great for me to stay at Purcell, and so my mother wrote 1,000 letters to trust. She found a directory of grant-making trusts in the library, and she wrote 1,000 letters. Maybe it was 1,000, maybe it was less. A lot of letters. And one charitable foundation just wrote back at the very end of the time when this was all coming to an end, sent us the money for the school fees. They sent us a check in a letter.
Crazy.
I mean, sometimes you just can't believe how things happen, can you? Of course, It was lucky that I won Young Musician after those 2 years of sixth form, because it kind of proved to them that they invested well in their product. My phone's doing something weird. Just a sec.
Oh, are you supposed to be in your meeting?
Yeah, but I can give it 5 minutes.
No, what you're saying about your mum is, historically, that's what I used to do for my youth orchestra tours every year, because we couldn't afford the fees for my youth orchestra tours. So I'd just write letters to local businesses every year and say, please pay for my youth orchestra tour. And they did every year. Every year somebody paid for me to go.
Amazing.
It was the best.
I mean, now you and I, the letters we write are all about getting money for commissions, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But it's a good training for that. And a good training for the fact that you will write 200 letters and one of them might come back and say yes. This will tell you a lot. The year that Guinness paid for my youth orchestra tour, but said I wasn't allowed to tell anybody because they didn't want to encourage underage drinking.
Well, that worked.
I mean, I didn't like to tell them what I was probably going to be spending most of the tour doing.
Oh dear. You think that young people drink to the point of oblivion, and then you go on a tour with an amateur orchestra, including quite a number of doctors, and you just go, okay, this is beyond. Amazing. I think I'm going to have to go. Is there anything specific you'd like to ask me?
No, I have this whole page of questions, and I've not asked you a single one of them.
Oh, really?
Well,
why don't you ask a few?
Okay, right. I'm going to ask you, because all of my questions would end up taking you down rabbit holes and take an awfully long time to answer. But I did have some questions from other people. So Peter and Lucy say, when you're the soloist with an orchestra, how does the dynamic between you, the conductor, and the orchestra work? Are you able to play completely your own interpretation, or do you get input, direction, or something else from the conductor? And I know sometimes you are the conductor, and I know sometimes also you'll be directing.
No, but it's a very interesting question. Well, obviously it depends on the conductor. The funny thing is with my repertoire, it's very often not particularly well known by conductors, even the Strauss, even the Mozart. But I find most good conductors want to know what you want. The very best conductors want everything that you want and want to learn from your experience of playing a piece like the Strauss hundreds of times. So with Sakari Oromo, I remember some years ago going to play the Strauss with CBSO with him, and he asked for a meeting for, which is great. And he said, right, what do you want? I said, sorry, what do you mean? He said, just tell me everything you want. So I told him all my tricks, all my secrets, all my little moments. And he said, oh yeah, I can really see how that works. But then someone like Todd Handley, I was recording Finzi Interlude with him, with Bournemouth. And he said, Nick, we'll just have a moment with this for me. And I said, yeah, okay, I'll play it for you. Here, play this bit here, pointed to a bit. So I played it. Yep, that's great, thank you, don't waste a note. I said, now, he said, this bit here. I said, so I played it. He said, yep, that's great, thank you. And finally, this bit here. That's how I played it. That's absolutely it. I totally get what you want. It'll be fine. It'll be great. Thank you so much. Look forward to it. Half an hour later on stage, it was as if he was in my head. he got that piece is not that easy to shape. He got the shape of it from 3 structural nodes that even I hadn't quite identified, but which meant everything about how it. And if I wanted to say something, I said, Todd, he said, yeah, I got it. I know exactly what you want. Leave that to me. They just didn't do it quite as I wanted either. Tell me if this is right. But we did it in about 2 takes, I think. So sometimes it's a real dream. And I mean, it's interesting working with someone like Mark Elder because he's quite challenging. And I really like that too. So I played the Vaughan Williams many, many times. And then I went over to to Holland to perform it with him a few times. And it was real pleasure. But he had lots of ideas and it was really interesting. And normally quite small things, but he is somebody in rehearsal. He's absolutely giving everything in rehearsal. The concerts are always incredibly elegant with him and actually very, very, very warm and great feeling. The rehearsals, he sweats. I don't just mean he's sweating, but he's literally sweating to get the detail that he wants. It's like he's driven, really driven. There was one time when I went to perform a concerto that had been written for me, and I'd played it many times with the composer, when the conductor told me that I wasn't doing it how he thought it should go. And that didn't go down very well.
I can imagine.
We found a way through it, but there was a slightly uncomfortable 5 or 10 minutes in the rehearsal room.
Yeah, I can believe that.
So, but we're good friends now.
I mean, but
we understand each other.
At least it was you. I mean, because I can imagine you in that situation, just seeing how you worked with the Chamber Orchestra in Germany, are so kind of gentle, but also you're not going to take any. It's a winning combination if you're in that
Thank
situation.
you, that's very sweet. I really love that. That's a lovely question, thank you. Is it Peter and Lucy?
It's Peter and Lucy. Have you got time for one more?
Yes, no, go ahead.
Okay, right. Molly says, and this interests me as well. She said, don't laugh, but do you have to do any special exercise to keep physically fit enough to play, or does practice itself build up all the right muscles? Because this always interests me with embouchure and presumably a lot of stomach muscles that we don't.
Yeah, there is nothing that trains oboe playing other than oboe playing. So, but there are different sorts of training in a way to do with stamina, breath stamina. So, I mean, I don't kind of need to do that in quite the same way, but when I was when I first started learning the Strauss, which has got a bit breath challenges, I would run up and down the stairs a couple of times and then play the first 2 pages and then do that again. And then, so that I got really used to. But I learned that planning how and where you breathe is a terrific way of making the body relax about the breathing. And as I get older, I realize that good breathing is all about the more you relax, the better you do it. So nothing trains the body for oboe playing other than oboe playing. But I think walking is great exercise.
Love it.
I did try couch to 5K and I hurt my ankle, so I had to do it.
Oh, that's not good. No, I've just started week 5.
Oh, I'm so impressed. Are you doing 5K now?
Well, I used to do a lot of. I just used to run 5Ks. I mean, like 3 times a week. But then I moved to where I'm living at the moment, and it's extremely hilly, and all of the hills go up.
But you sort of can't continue ascending forever.
I know,
It's Elysium.
I'm in my own Escher Prince, you know. But
Amazing.
no, I found it very, very traumatic going out running here and start off with. So I kind of stopped doing it quite so much. And then as lockdown happened and I wasn't getting any regular exercise, because normally I walk everywhere and I walk a lot and walk fast when I'm not running. So suddenly not doing that, I got really unfit and I just couldn't, I was in a terrible state with running. I was getting very, very slow and I couldn't do 5K anymore. I could only do 3K.
Wow.
So I thought I'd build myself back up with
You use it or you lose it.
Exactly.
That is like that with oboe playing. I say use it or you lose it.
Yeah, I can believe that.
Yeah.
Okay, can I give you one more question?
Yes, go ahead.
Right, this one's Jasper. And the question is, what's the most important thing to be successful in the industry? Do you reckon?
Honesty. There is nothing. Music is an industry, but it is also an art. So it is an art industry. And if you can listen to yourself, be honest with yourself, and be honest and open with your audience, then that is the sort of fundamental bedrock of everything else. I've tried being ambitious. I am ambitious. I've tried doing something about it. It generally ends up being something completely other than I've planned or wanted. I tend to go a certain way towards, if there's a clear sign that something might work, then I will pursue it, and I will be quite relentless about pursuing it, like finding money for a new piece or a certain take on something. Then I am, but actually all of it comes down to, if I think about, there's a certain composer at the moment who I realized that I really wanted him to write me a major sonata, because one of the things that's missing from the repertoire is big scale sonatas, and he's someone I think would do it is doing it really, really well. And there is some money now, but there basically was no money. But I had to say that we would do it, and that it would happen. And sometimes you just have to take a kind of leap of faith. But the reason I know that is because I know that he loves my playing. I love his music, and he's written for me a lot before, and I think he'll write a really great piece. So I think that there are lots of aspects to being in this art industry, but I think if you're open and honest and show yourself as to who you are, with enough protection from the negative, from the trolls.
Yep.
Do not troll my friend Fenella, whoever you are. I'll come for you. If you basically, you do open yourself to vulnerability if you are honest and open, but then life is so much more livable. That's the thing. I don't just mean in your behavior. I just mean everything about your attitude and the things that really mean something to you. Focus on those, on the things that really matter. And those change. Gosh, they've changed for me in the last 2 months. Wildly. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, though.
The honesty thing is, I mean, it's so important. It's why your playing speaks to an audience in a way that lots of other people maybe don't. Because with that honesty comes greater connection, I think, always. So
the more you can get out of the way, that's the thing, isn't it? It's about realizing that you're the means for the music to come from the composer to the performer. I always think that most things in nature come in fours, and I've always thought that Britain, nobody could be more of a Britain lover than me, but the idea of there being a three-way communication from composer to performer audience must be missing something. And of course, I think it's actually the spark of creativity and inspiration to the composer, and then from the composer the performer to the audience. That for me seems to make like sense for ages, you know, the the seasons, and seems to make more sense to me. But it's incredible to think where it comes from. I mean, I'm not any kind of composer. I can improvise, I do improvise, but I'm still in absolute awe of how composers do what they do.
Yeah,
it's just utterly amazing, and I'm very, very lucky to know and have close working and relationships and friendships with some really great composers. But I mean, the work I do in that field is by far the proudest thing I have in my whole working life. It's more important than anything. Not only it's of course because of my instrument, and there being a sort of big hole in the romantic repertoire, but that's also a great thing. I don't think I would be someone very different if I was a violinist. But then look at you do Sibelius and you do all that great stuff, and then you do all of this other stuff too. But then you're just kind of determined not to do exactly the same part as anybody else. And I really like that. You're a very unusual violinist. Can I just say that?
I hope that's in a positive
You're also
sense.
very good. You're not, because you're not only just absolutely brilliant, but you're just so committed to your composers, and it pushes all the buttons in the right place for me. It's wonderful.
Well, I was so lucky in so many ways in the way I grew up, that so in my youth orchestra we did, like, already from my first concert, I mean, we always did new music, because the conductor realized that a bunch of kids, it was in Borough of Ealing, it was Ealing Youth Orchestra, so
right, yes,
yeah, and lots of the kids in the orchestra maybe weren't the greatest players, but they were all highly intelligent, and he knew that he could get us to play Lutoslawski in my first ever concert, I think it was, things like, you know, contemporary complex repertoire. He could get us to play that really well, where he could never get us to play a Beethoven symphony well, because it would just sound rubbish.
That's amazing, isn't it?
So
yeah,
we mostly, you know, we'd always have, you know, good stuff like Rachmaninoff and good hearty Tchaikovsky stuff that we could sink into. But there was always new music, and he introduced us. So Mark Anthony Turnage became a patron of the orchestra. He'd go on tour with us, and it was the best. You know, we'd go to the pub after the concerts, and you were talking to like a famous person. It was amazing. But also my violin teacher, when I was like 9 or 10, had a great British string quartet, and loads of the first half 20th century works had been written for them, because he was in his well into his 80s when I was having
Who's this?
Sidney Griller.
Oh, right, of course.
So he had all of that. You know, you'd go in for a lesson, and he'd show you a score that had been marked, annotated by the composer. And so you know, growing up around these worlds where composers were you know, real people who you worked with, and it was just a world that I loved. I loved the fact that you could talk to a composer, that you could ask them questions.
I just love that. Yeah. The other day I did my students in Germany did a Vortragsabend class concert, and I didn't tell the young player that was playing a piece that the composer Thea Musgrave was actually zooming in from Los Angeles in her dressing gown.
Amazing.
and then she went, oh. I said, well, if I had told you, you'd have got more nervous. And so she played Thea's solo oboe piece that she wrote for me, and it was just lovely to have Thea there, and just for the students to see, you know, a real composer in that way. But they're lucky that I can put them onto some really good music. It's really good new music. They're really interested in it. They're really interested in spreading things to different genders of composer as well. So that's really, really exciting. They're quite motivated to do it.
That's fantastic.
Oh, it's so nice. I think I should go. Otherwise
you probably should. You're only like half an hour late for your...
I know. They'll live. It's so nice to talk to you.
Oh, it's so lovely.
Thank
to
you
talk
to your friends who ask you, for people who ask questions. It's really great to see you. Love to James.
And love to pleasure as well. And hopefully see you. Fingers crossed before too very long.
Be soon, we hope.
Yeah.
Okay.
Look after
Take care,
yourself.
love.
Bye.
Bye now. Bye.